Hey there, Grumpy Old Fart here. This is a compilation video of some of my greatest hits. Hope y'all enjoy them.
Um, and many character classes in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons have traits and abilities to help them to survive in the wilderness. And a lot of them are pretty good at it, especially when they get into higher levels. But even at lower levels, some of these classes are very, very survivable in a wilderness environment. Barbarians, they're tough, they're hardy, they have a lot of hit points, they have healing, automatic healing proficiencies. Uh, they have certain abilities that allow them to traverse nature, uh, survival skills, that kind of thing, and they're pretty good. Rangers are the rugged outdoorsmen. In modern times, they would be, I guess, mountain men, the hunters, fishers, trappers. They live out in the middle of nowhere, and they can survive on on nature. They can survive off of nature, as it were. The rugged outdoorsman type. Clerics at higher levels are really good. They have, and even at lower levels, they have healing spells. Clerics can wear armor just like a fighter, and they can have heavy weapons like a mace to do significant damage, and they fight almost as good as fighters do. So they have some good abilities there. But they also at higher levels have a spell called Word of Recall. So if a high level cleric gets into a tight spot, he uses the spell. He casts the spell Word of Recall, and it automatically teleports him, transports him back to a safe space, as it were. Gets him out of a tight jam. Wizards, magic users, mages, whatever you want to call them, they have a number of spells to help them. They don't have very many hit points. They have the lowest hit points in the game, but they have the best offensive punch in the fact that they have powerful spells that can deal a lot of damage. But they also have some defensive spells, like Stone Skin, Armor, that kind of thing. Informational spells to help them find out stuff. And they can teleport. So if they get into a tight spot, they can teleport anywhere they want, as long as they've seen it or been there or whatever. And even if they haven't, it's risky, but they can teleport to places they haven't been to. But some of these character classes are very survivable in an outdoor environment. But in my opinion, none of them even come close to druids. Druids are a subclass of clerics, and they are priests of nature. They survivalists these days, they teach you how to circumvent certain aspects, some of the deadlier aspects of nature, like weather. They show you how to build shelters. They show you how to find food in the wilderness, in the woods, and whatever. How to find potable water, that kind of thing. Right? Okay. Well, clerics enjoy animal friendship. Most animals will fight to protect the druid. The animals will actually bring them food. You got to go foraging, they'll bring you food. As long as you're a vegetarian, you're good to go. And most druids are. They have weather control spells to avoid that deadly aspect of nature. The storm's coming in, well, we'll just send it that way. That kind of thing. Tweak it a little bit, make it not so bad. Well, it looks like another blizzard coming. No, we'll send it over that way. They can create water, just like a cleric can create water as well, but druids are really good at it. They have the protection of plants and trees. So the wild, the undergrowth, the trees, the shrubs, they'll protect druids. And at high levels, druids can shape change into normal animals. And a lot of people think, well, shape changing into a normal animal is not that big a deal. Well, guess what? When you're in an outdoor environment, that is a godsend. I have a friend named Gerald. Gerald is the ultimate gamer. Gerald is very intelligent. He's got the perfect head for gaming. Very smart. He's one of those guys who knows more about your character, and you're holding the sheet in front of you. When he was in the military, he was EOD, which is Explosive Ordnance Disposal. So he's a very, very logical, intelligent person. He told me a story that happened to him a long time ago, and I'm going to kind of relate it to you. He was running a high-level druid in a high-level game, and they were in the vast reaches of the Arctic North. And the group was going along, and I don't know what they were doing. I don't remember enough about the story. It's been years since I've heard it. But the entire party was wiped out, except for Gerald's druid. and Gerald was left with nothing out on the slopes of a mountainside, and it was, hip deep snow, and he was just destitute. He had nothing, no armor, no weapons, no supplies, nothing. So what did he do? His druid shape changed into a polar bear and walked home. It's that simple. Polar bears are normal animals. So when people look at the D&D books, the first thing they do is they go for the fighter or the wizard. Don't discount that druid offhand, because it's one thing to be able to avoid some of the deadly aspects of nature, such as wild animals and weather, but druids enjoy the protection and support of these aspects. If you're going on a long wilderness trek in Dungeons and Dragons, and the DM says, "Hey, so what character would you like to play?" Consider a druid. They have some alignment restrictions, but it's nothing you can't get past. And they can use weapons. They can even use a type of a sword called a tulwar, which clerics can't do, at least in the basic rules. And they can wear leather armor, as I understand it. They can, and they have some pretty good spells too. Some of them are quite powerful. And nature works with them, not against them. So if you're going on a long wilderness trek in a D&D game, consider a druid. Trust me, you could do far, far worse. This one is convert or else. And this is, in case you don't know, is about clerics. Every group has to have at least one healer in order to be very effective. I mean, you can sometimes get by without one if you can make it to a town and pay for healing and stuff. But for the most part, you kind of have to have a cleric. And the 4 standbys are fighter, cleric, thief, and wizard. But you can fudge and not have one of those. But if you're going to fudge and not have one, don't include the cleric in the not having one part, because you're going to need one. A big part of this game is combat, and afterwards you got to heal up, and healing naturally takes a while, Now, clerics in the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons game are the primary healing class. Druids and paladins can also heal, and they have healing spells, and the paladin can lay on hands for healing. And then barbarians have a minor healing proficiency. They can heal they improve your healing on a daily basis. But none of them come close to the cleric, who can heal you outright. Clerics are religious priests who travel with and provide healing for the group. Clerics can wear armor, and they can use some serious weapons, like a mace and hammer, club. Usually, according to the book, it's blunt weapons, but I know a lot of dungeon masters who, if you're a cleric of a war god, why can't you use that god's weapons? If you're a cleric, for example, of Ares, why can't you use a spear? That kind of thing. So a lot of DMs fudge that. You can use blunt weapons and whatever weapons your god uses, whatever your god prefers. And that's fine. As long as the rules are consistent and apply equally to everybody, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. I actually do that myself in games. So, and clerics also fight almost as well as fighter classes. So being able to wear armor and use serious weapons and being able to fight, that makes them a very effective class, not just with the healing, but in combat itself. And that makes them very effective, very effective. Now, here's something many players and dungeon masters overlook. One of the primary requirements of any cleric is to further and expand the reach of his god. And in many cultures, primitive cultures primarily, but in many cultures, their goal is to expand the worship base of their god, because in theory, the more worshippers a god has, the more powerful he is. That's the working theory there. And so many religions, especially evil ones, basically won't heal anyone not of their faith, and they won't Uh, they want to convert people, everyone. And there's, I really want you to convert, you know, or repent your sins, and I'll heal you. And then there's the evil, those are the good ones. And then the evil clerics are like, convert or die. That's basically what it boils down to. And many people overlook that in the game. Most people running clerics in Dungeons and Dragons treat them as fighters with healing abilities, and you know they're just as depraved and wanton in a brothel as any off-duty mercenary. However, they also have to tithe 10% to their god and blah 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 blah. Visit the temple, perform all the rituals, that kind of thing. And a lot of players tend to overlook that. A lot of dungeon masters do too. Clerics of these evil religions, and a lot of any of these mythological religions, generally should not provide healing unless the recipient is willing to repent his sins and or convert. Conversion is better, but you know, take it a step at a time if you have to. But the point is, the cleric in the group will want everybody around him to worship the same god as him, because that expands and improves the power, makes his god more powerful. You see, that's the brain working there. We had a cleric years ago, and he played it well. He was an evil cleric in a group of mostly neutral or good people, and he was trying to get everybody to convert, and of course nobody would. Well, after a big battle, well, you want some healing? Let's talk turkey. That's the way that worked. We had one guy in a different game years ago. This particular cleric was an evil cleric, and he insisted he wouldn't do anything for anyone who wasn't a worshiper of Grumsh. And for those of you who don't know, our cleric was a half-orc. Grumsh is the Orcan god. He's got one eye. They call him One Eye. he's just an evil bastard. They blood sacrifices, the whole 9 yards. And the player played it well, because in game he was doing everything his god needed him to do to be a worshiper. And a lot of the other players were taken aback by it. But I understood. I was running a barbarian and I didn't like it. But I understood. And this guy said, so, do you need healing? And I said, no, you keep it. I had the barbarian healing proficiency. I was good. I could put a bandage on myself, put a pressure bandage, throw a little wine on there for disinfectant. I'm good. But he did play his character well. He played the cleric in my opinion, the way he should have. And the dungeon master saw it that way as well. Some of the other players weren't happy about it, but got to do what you got to do. So yeah, a lot of the character classes. If you're generally in Dungeons and Dragons, the group wants to play whatever the alignment is. They all want to be roughly the same or something pretty close so they can get along. When you have one evil player in the group, I did a video the other day called The Unpopular One. I was the unpopular one. So yeah, having one person who's not the same alignment as everybody else, or at least pretty close to it, can be a distraction. In that other video, I was the only survivor. And in this one, several people converted to Grumsh, and some others decided they wanted to hang out with a barbarian. And you know what? The beauty of this is there was no hard feelings, because it's all in the game. Your characters can disagree and still get along. It comes down to alignment.
Okay, it is a foregone conclusion in any AD&D game that there will be combat. The downside of combat is that people die. Most of the time, it's the monsters that bite the dust, but once in a while, it is the PC, or PCs, that get the short end of the stick. And if you've got players who are particularly attached to their character, they're going to want it back. If a player character is a low-level, newer character, chances are the player just needs to work up another character. If the player character is a higher level character, or is integral to the storyline somehow, sometimes it behooves the group to get the character back. In real life, death is permanent. In Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, not so much. Unless you're a half-orc, apparently. Let's read. There are several routes player characters can take to facilitate getting a dead player character back. Most of it is clerical. One of it is druid and magic user. There's 2 clerical spells that I've researched. And there's other ways as well. I'm not saying there's not. But these are the basic ways. The first is Raise Dead. It's a 5th level clerical spell. It has a time limit. The person can only be dead 1 day per level of the cleric casting the spell. So if your cleric is 20th level and he's been dead 30 days, you're SOL. Got to find some other way. This only works on dwarves, gnomes, half-elves, halflings, and humans. Apparently half-orcs are shit out of luck. You're done. Sorry. This is probably why very few people run half-orcs. At least they did back then. Back then, people really didn't run half-orcs. I have one good friend, Randy, who runs a half-orc named Vlad, and the character's a badass. And Randy ran him well, and he survived. He never died and had to get resurrected that I'm aware of. So, the next one is Resurrection, which is a 7th level clerical spell. It also has a time limit, 10 years per clerical level. So if that same 20th level cleric tried a resurrection spell, the guy could have been dead up to 200 years and still work okay. It works on the same races as the Raise Dead. So once again, half-orcs are, they're going to get the shaft. This is the way it is. There is another method of bringing player characters back. This is not a Raise Dead where they bring the body back and everything. This is called Reincarnation. It is a 7th level druid spell and a 6th level magic user spell. The time limit for the druid one is 1 week. The time limit for the magic user one is 1 day per magic user level. So if you're outside of that time frame, your reincarnate will not work. It works on any race. But here's the kicker. You're probably going to change races. So this will work on half-orcs. Be sure to read through the spells very carefully. Each of them has a different chart that they're going to reincarnate into. And the spells are quite specific how to do it. Most dungeon masters I know of allow Raise Dead and Resurrection to work on half-orcs, but some do not. It is completely up to you. There are several items also, artifacts, things like that allow Raise Dead and Resurrection. Read through them very carefully. If they say, as per the spell, it may not work on a half-orc. Okay. I enjoy running half-orcs. Every dungeon master I have played under has allowed Raise Dead to work on half-orcs because they're half-human. That being said, it doesn't say it in the book. It says specifically these are the ones it works on, and that's it. So, hopefully, you have a dungeon master that's a little more easygoing. But if not, run something other than a half-orc. That's all I got to tell you. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons classes for beginners. For more experienced players, the choice of class is a fairly easy one. Most experienced players understand the various classes. They know what they want to run, with the blessings of the Dungeon Master, of course. And they know how to fit that character into the tapestry of the group and the mosaic of the campaign. This video is not for those players. Beginning players are a whole other breed. They have no idea what the character classes are, what they do, or how they fight. Many of them have no frame of reference, and they will need to figure out how the new character they've just created can be useful to the party. This video is my take on the various classes and how they can be used to benefit the group. So if anybody has alternate opinions, be sure and put it in the comments. These new players will need the various viewpoints. Okay. So please, if you have a different opinion, stick it in there. Okay. Give these new players every advantage we can. Before I get into it, though, if you enjoy my content, it would really help me out if you would hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, share my content on social media, and post a comment or two. Remember, I welcome your comments, even if you disagree with me. If you enjoy a good book, check out my author page on Amazon. My pen name is H.L. Anderson. You can find all of my books there. I like to think I write good stories that make you think. I wrote a 3-book science fiction Western series called Drifters. I'm working on a 4th. I wrote a fun story about a house in New Orleans where the monsters all hang out. It's called The House Off Farrago Road. I wrote a political fantasy called The Righteous President. Yeah. I've got 2 of them so far. I'm working on a 3rd. Science fiction, kind of futuristic space warfare. It's a study of humanity from an alien perspective. The first one is Vanguard 1. The second one is Task Force Terminus. Hope you get them, and I hope you like them. All right. This is my take on the various classes and how they can be used to benefit the group. So, again, if you're an experienced player and you have a different opinion, stick it in here. We need to give these new players every advantage we can. Okay? So here we go. First off, I went right down the list, right out of the Unearthed Arcana. Cavalier. These are fighters of noble birth or who are of a high enough social standing to have a noble benefactor to sponsor them as cavaliers. This is separate from a knight. Cavaliers can be considered knights, but not all knights are cavaliers. Any character who distinguishes himself can become a knight. Cavaliers are born to it and consider themselves the upper crust of such orders. They would be the ones in service of the king or the other nobles. In battle, cavaliers lead the charge. To retreat or to even be suspected of cowardice is a great dishonor to a cavalier. Paladins are knights of a holy order dedicated to a specific deity. They are the militant arm of the church and serve the clerics thereof. In battle, paladins profess their faith in their deity by leading the charge. My God will protect me, therefore I will kill everything. My God will make me invincible, essentially, is what it boils down to. They have to have the ultimate faith in their God. In my world, paladins prefer the weapon of choice of their deity. Not all paladins use swords, for example. A paladin of Thor, and I talked about this in a video I did called Palliating Paladins. A paladin of Thor will want to use a hammer. You see what I'm saying? Clerics are militant, holy or unholy men, depending on their alignment, who spread the word of their deity and convert the unbelievers. In battle, clerics fight well, but many prefer to stay in the rear to protect the wizards and or to use their healing spells to fortify the frontline fighters. After the battle, their healing spells serve to revive and fortify the injured. So they're the medics of the group. They're very, very important. People underestimate running a cleric. Do not discount their offensive capabilities. Heavy maces, hammers, and slings can be quite effective, just as many of their spells can be. Cleric, one of the more... Sorry, we have a new cat, and she just wants to be everywhere. One of the more effective clerical spells is called Flame Strike. Look that one up. Or Blade Barrier. That's just nasty. In my world, clerics are limited to blunt weapons as per the book, but they can also use the weapons of choice of their deity, similar to paladins. Spellcasters can be complex for new players, so keep that in mind. And I believe paladins also get spells too, so keep that in mind. All right. Druids are priests of nature who fight well and have exceedingly powerful combat capabilities. They serve to protect nature and heal those in need. In battle, they act very similar to clerics, but have more combat capabilities and less healing capabilities. Spellcasters can be complex for new players, so keep that in mind. Druids also get better weapon capabilities, but less armor capabilities. So, They're more offensive oriented. Fighters are frontline juggernauts or back rank archers, depending on the character you have. Because they're saying you have a fighter is a very generic term. It depends on the stats that you roll up. Dexterous fighters will use missile weapons, while strong fighters will hack, slash, and bash. Heavy armor is always a plus. Barbarians, lacking the formal training and discipline of the fighter class, they're primitive, kind of a primitive cross between fighters and rangers. In battle, barbarians think outside the box, preferring the bold and daring actions. They're not going to fill the ranks, but they're going to sneak in and attack or find some other way to attack more effectively. Think Conan. The barbarians that in the Unearthed Arcana were essentially, there's multiple types of barbarians, but the classic one is Conan. That's who it was based off of. Rangers are like mountain men. They can have a good working relationship with druids, but also draw the druid's ire for harvesting the wildlife. Yeah, because druids protect nature. In battle, rangers prefer missile weapons, but can close to melee range as well. It depends on the situation. As a dungeon master, I give bonuses to a group for hunting and foraging when at least one ranger is involved. Rangers can be complex for new players because they have a variety of different abilities. Kind of like the barbarians, they can be a little complex. Magic users and illusionists are the wizards of myth and lore. They have powerful spells, but are crap in melee combat. If you're a wizard and you're going into melee combat, you're doing it wrong. In battle, wizards stay in the back and use their spells to hurt the enemy and help the group. I think of them as artillery pieces on the battlefield. If the enemy gets close to the wizard, you're doing it wrong. Care must be taken when casting spells. Area of effect spells can easily encompass party members by accident. Spellcasters can be complex for new players. I keep saying that, but I cannot say it enough. Sometimes wizards can serve the party through informational spells as well as combat. So they're good for divining things. A thief. These are shady actors in street environments. Thieves are good at detecting and disarming the traps which litter underground labyrinths. They are also good at hiding and sneaking, finding different ways in, making a different path as opposed to the one you already got, as opposed to the obvious one. Little cat, you are just being an asshole. All right, here we go. In battle, thieves prefer to meld into the shadows and attack with surprise, where their backstabbing capabilities can be devastating. Barring that, missile weapons are preferred. Okay, because in D&D, if you're using a bow, you get 2 attacks. So that helps anybody. Acrobats are thieves which prefer agility to stealth. They're second-story men par excellence. That's what they're for. They're acrobats. Assassins can operate as thieves, but also have the added abilities of disguise and impersonation, as well as assassination. Assassination capabilities can be devastating because an opponent can be killed outright regardless of their hit points. All you have to do is roll well on the table, the assassination table. These can be, sometimes they can be a little complex, but I don't think they're too complex for new players. Monks are learned men of remote temples. Their martial arts training and quasi-mystic abilities make them a wild card in any combat situation. Monks can be complex for new players. Okay? And they start out extremely weak. They get more powerful later on, but they start out extremely weak. Bards in 1st edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons are rare. The method by which a character becomes a bard in 1st edition D&D is so convoluted and specific that, in my opinion, by the time you get to be a bard, you don't really need to be one. In combat, 1st edition bards can be very effective, acting as fighters and or thieves with added spell capabilities. Spellcasters can be complex for new players, keep that in mind. Also keep in mind, but by the time in 1st edition, by the time you become a bard, you are already multi-classed and higher level. So, Keep that in mind. Read up on the section in Bards. It's in the back. It's not in the normal section of with the other character classes. I hope this helps the newer players, with their decisions. Creating a new character can be complex and taxing even for the experienced players. New players may find the process a bit overwhelming. I designed this video to try and help new players understand how their characters fit into the game. Anyone who knows of anything I forgot or left out or has a different opinion that, maybe does something different, please remember to put it in the comments. Remember, the goal is to help new players adjust to the game and be able to enjoy the experience a bit more. I'm not perfect, nobody is, but it's up to the experienced players to help out the newer ones. It benefits the game in general and helps everybody to have more fun, and that is the whole point of the game. If you have a fighter who doesn't know what to do, or a wizard who doesn't know their spells, or a thief who doesn't understand their capabilities, if that's the only one in the group, your group's going to suffer. You want to help the newer players understand their characters and what they can do and how to use them. In Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, there are many different races that you can choose for your character. Your players can choose a number of different races. One of these is a half-orc. Half-orcs are essentially half human. Orcs will have, not to be gross, but orcs will have sex with anything. But they can only breed with orcs and humans in my game. Now, according to the book, half-orcs can be, you can breed with an elf, you can breed with this, you can breed with that. My contention is it simplifies the entire process if all you use is humans, half-orcs and humans, okay? And I'm not saying that, because as I understand it in later editions, they said you can have what's called a mul, M-U-L, mule, whatever. It's a half-orc, or a half-human, half-dwarf. That being said, I've never used it. I can't say one way or the other. But when you're dealing with half-orcs, if you in your game you just say half-orcs can only breed with orcs and half-orcs and humans, it simplifies your life. That's all I'm saying. Half-orc characters were somehow either rescued from orc tribes, or the orcs kidnapped a human female, bred with her, and then she was rescued before she gave birth. Either way, the children were raised with humans. Half-orcs get a +1 to strength and constitution and a -2 for the charisma. But if you'll read in the book, it says this -2 charisma only affects races other than orcs. So when they're dealing with orcs, they can have a full 18 charisma. Okay. Other races don't see charisma in the same way. And they have a very similar rule with dwarves. So, According to the player's handbook, half-orcs are limited to cleric, fighter, thief, or assassin. I don't see why they couldn't be druids. If they're alive, they're part of nature, and nature accepts everybody. So I see half-orcs as being able to be druids as well. Will they be a great druid? I don't know. They don't have a minus on their wisdom, so, But, I can see them being druids. Now, a later publication called The Unearthed Arcana came out in the mid-'80s. I got my first copy when I was in the Air Force. They have a new class called Barbarians, and I generally allow half-orcs to be barbarians as well. To me, they make excellent barbarians. Half-orcs of sufficient wisdom should be able to be paladins as well. Here's the thing. They get that -2, which automatically eliminates them from being a normal paladin. However, a paladin of Grumsh is an orc god. If his charisma is 18 with other orcs, or 17, or whatever the limit is, he should be able to be an anti-paladin of Grumsh. So he should be able to. But because, again, the charisma has to be 16 plus, he could only be an anti-paladin of Grumsh. Otherwise, he doesn't fit any stereotype as far as that goes. He doesn't qualify as a paladin under any other religion except for Grumsh. You see what I'm saying? Because if he rolls an 18 charisma and he has to subtract 2 with anybody other than orcs, his charisma is only 16, which does not qualify him as a paladin. But if he worships Grumsh, his charisma still is technically 18, so he can be an anti-paladin of Grumsh. Now, keep in mind, before your players decide they want to have an anti-paladin of Grumsh, they better read the definition, the little bit on Grumsh in the dungeon, in the Deities and Demigods, or the what was it? Deities and Demigods, and there's another one, Legend Lore, because there are some things that he would have to do as an anti-paladin of Grumsh that might not really sit well with him. I'm just saying. You have to play your character. Playing that character is a little dicey. I'm just saying. Keep in mind, allowing half-orcs to be druids and anti-paladins of Grumsh and barbarians are my house rules. The ones that I use. Feel free to ignore them, some of them or all of them, as you desire. A while back, I ran a half-orc cleric of Grumsh, and my cleric, true to his deity, tore out his left eye to prove, one of his eyes, I think it was his left one, to prove his faith. And I tried to run the character as close to the books and descriptions as possible, and I was not a fan, or the rest of the group was not a fan of me at all. They did not like me because of the, you can read the, I'm not going to go into it here, but there's some stuff that clerics of Grumsh have to do, and it's not nice. Grumsh is not a nice guy, just saying. Anyone who plays Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, any kind of a Dungeons and Dragons, any edition of Dungeons and Dragons, will eventually come into conflict with spellcasters. These include magic users, illusionists, clerics, and druids. Some monsters cast spells, demons, devils, that kind of thing. But primarily, it's going to be one of those four: magic user, illusionist, cleric, or druid, and may include others, but sometimes there's combinations, like a fighter mage or a thief cleric, that kind of thing. Thing about spellcasters is that they are rarely alone. Most mages and illusionists generally have henchmen regardless of how many people are in the opposing force. The primary tactic should always be to neutralize the spellcasters first. This is common sense when facing any force that includes spellcasters. Fighters and thieves can sure wreak havoc. Clerics just as are spellcasters, but fighters and thieves can wreak havoc, like nobody's business. But high-level casters are much, much worse. They're like howitzers on a battlefield. Artillery, heavy artillery. They can wipe out entire parties wholesale. They're nasty. If you play a wizard correctly against your player characters, they're in for a tough fight, regardless of how many hit points the caster has. Here are some tactics that I have found useful when dealing with high-level spellcasters. First off, you have to target spellcasters with multiple projectile weapons. Arrows are good, but spears are better. Over multiple rounds. You got to do it over multiple rounds. There's a reason. Many high-level magic users use stone skin spells, so the first round of fire may be negated. You also have to watch out for the volley spell, which, just read the spell. Once a spear or multiple arrows are lodged inside a wizard's chest or whatever, in his stomach, whatever, the magic user will find it very hard to cast spells. If the dungeon master is playing the wizard correctly, he'll have to get that fixed before he is able to cast effectively. If the wizard just keeps casting he's got 18 arrows in him and a spear hanging out of his chest and he's still casting, that's something to question. This guy has significantly, there's more to it than just a wizard. That's all I'm saying. Another good way to deal with a spellcaster is silence, 15-foot radius. But you have to center it on an item that they're wearing, not on them. There's a difference. This will eliminate a good part of their firepower. If you cast silence on the wizard, he gets a savings throw. If you cast silence on, say, his cape, all he knows is he can't utter verbal components. So that's going to eliminate a lot of his stuff, and he's got to find out how to get rid of that before he can continue. Silence 15-foot radius is a hell of a way to eliminate a lot of a spellcaster's spell capabilities. If you can get close enough to touch them, a water breathing spell will give them something else to worry about as they struggle to breathe. Water breathing allows them to breathe underwater, but if there's no water, they can't breathe. It's hard to cast spells when you can't breathe. And guess what? Water breathing has no savings throw. So you reach up, you touch him, he can't breathe, and then you take turns hacking on him because he can't cast. Okay. My son came up with this one, and this was a really nice one. He had an item that he could use to travel between dimensions, between planes. And long story short, he was able to grab this guy. Just all he had to do was grab him and teleport to this extra dimensional plane, and then let go of him and teleport back the next round. He had to survive one round of combat with this guy, and the guy couldn't get back. So teleporting them someplace else is a very nice way of dealing with them as well, providing they fail their savings throw. That's the thing. Teleporting them someplace deadly is even better. Like, in my son's case, it was the elemental plane of fire. My contention is teleportation can be a very useful weapon when dealing with spellcasters. Any spell you can cast to impede a caster will help. Like blindness, whole person, curses, entangle, darkness. Darkness is good because if he can't see who to cast on. And anything like that works. But non-casters can also be effective with darts tipped with drugs, knockout or poison kind of thing. And sorry, lost my place. Smoke, dust, ropes, and lassos. Anything you can think of to impede a spellcaster's casting ability will neutralize them. And most spellcasters require concentration to cast. That's a foregone conclusion. Any attacks, melee or missile, should be timed while the caster is in the middle of casting his spell. Now, this is very effective if you use the initiative. Watch my video on initiatives. You'll see what I'm talking about. While he's casting, if you smack him with your sword, there's a good chance he's going to lose a spell. Disrupting a spell not only robs the caster of this spell, but it also tends to frustrate and anger him. And angry people make mistakes. I once saw a player. Now this is an actual story. This actually happened. A player who was up on the hill. He's using a bow very effectively. The wizard on the opposing side teleported away, and he said, "Oh crap!" So he's looking for another target. On his next shot, he fumbled and his bowstring broke. So he used basically. After he figured this out, he went to hide, and as he turned around, he noticed that the bad guy wizard was like right there, going to hit him with a big bad spell. So the next round, in order to stop this enemy wizard that from killing him, he started using this bow and just slapping the shit out of him. Just pat, 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 pat. This turned out to be quite effective because it did no damage, but it was very, very painful. If you've ever been slapped with a stick, a switch, for example, when you were a kid, or in this case, a thick piece of wood smacking them. Yeah, that's no damage, but very, very painful. And it distracted the wizard, excuse me, long enough so that other people could get up there and help him. And he pulled it out of his ass, but you know what? It saved his life. And you have to do things like that in the game. You have to be able to think on your feet. This guy was able to distract the wizard long enough to where the wizard couldn't cast any spells. And then once the rest of the group got up there, they were able to hack this guy dead. But my contention is, pain is a really great diversion. Any way you can distract that guy from using a spell to kill you is a good way. There's one thing I do know. Player etiquette. Dungeon masters expect certain things from their players. Mostly in-game, but sometimes players can get on a dungeon master's nerves, and this is some advice for the players. When you're sitting in somebody's game, there's a certain amount of respect that's needed. As a player, it is important to show respect for your dungeon master. I'm not saying you need to kowtow to him, kiss his ass on every word that he utters, but show some respect. After all, he's gone to the time and trouble to create the adventure. He's taken time out to research stuff, create maps, create a world for you to play in. Show him a little bit of respect. I'm not, again, don't kiss his ass, but show him some respect. Excuse me, I'm still getting over that cold. If you have a complaint or a problem with the game, feel free to bring it up, but don't get angry or belligerent. Many times I've had players who didn't understand why certain NPCs acted the way they did, or why certain events happened. Usually through the course of the game, new information becomes clear, which would explain it. The fact that the player realized something wasn't right means they are on the ball. Now, if you really think the dungeon master is cheating you, talk to him in private. Be respectful, but talk to him in private, because sometimes things happen and the dungeon master doesn't realize it. After all, we're only human. Everybody, including the dungeon master, we're only human. And there's a lot of moving parts to keep track of when you're running a game. So if you feel you've been cheated, or if you feel something's not right, bring it up to him. It's okay. Just be respectful. And because you notice things, that means you're paying attention. That's a good thing. Which brings me to my next point. Pay attention. As a dungeon master, there's nothing more aggravating, especially during an initiatives, your combat. You're going down the initiatives. When you ask a player, okay, what are you doing? And the player basically the reply is, what's going on? That's just irritating. When that happens, that's a clear indicator that they weren't paying attention. And my trademark response is, go back to sleep, and then I go on to the next player. If I'm counting down initiatives, 10, 9, 8, 5, get down to 5. Okay, what are you doing? The guy says, what's going on? All right, go back to sleep. 4s, and I just go on. I ain't got time for that shit. Turn off your phone, your music, whatever the hell you're doing. Close the book that you're reading. Stop gabbing with the other player. Stop, daydreaming, whatever. Pay attention. Turn off your phones. Nothing is more, well, the not paying attention is more aggravating, I think. But during the course of the game, nobody wants to hear your phone go off. Nobody cares what your ringtones are. And if your phone is that important, walk away from the game, use it, and then come back. And turn it off when you come back. And if you're listening to your music, with your iPod or whatever, you're not paying attention. That's that simple. If you want music in the background for everybody to hear, turn it down low so it doesn't bother the game. Games are generally held at a location of the dungeon master's choice. Respect the location and the choice. Don't get upset if it's not a location you would choose. When you run a game, you can choose the location you would choose. And then the dungeon master, if he's your player, he has to abide by those choices. See what I'm saying? Laughing and joking around is great as long as you pay attention. If you provide your own snacks, that's great. If you do not, don't make a pig of yourself. Make sure there's plenty to go around. As a dungeon master, I would usually make dinner for my players, and I turned it into kind of a social gathering, and everybody had plenty, and that was all great. Some dungeon masters don't have that option for whatever reason. So, if for example, if the dungeon master is stuck playing at somebody else's house, he doesn't have that option. So keep that in mind. If you're going to bring snacks, that's great. If there's communal snacks, share it. Make sure everybody has plenty. Come prepared. Be ready to go at game time. If you regularly show up 10 to 20 minutes late without your character and needing to borrow dice and pencils, etc., you're taking away from the gaming experience of the other players. Have your character updated and ready to play before you arrive. Whenever I was late to a game, it was usually work-related, and I tried to slip in with as little disturbance as possible. Now, You will not be able to be on time for every game. It's just not possible. The world turns. You're human. Your humanity gets in the way. Work, life, family, emergencies get in the way. Everything will get in the way. You will not be able to be there on time for every game. We understand that. When you do show up late, slip in undisturbed. Try to make as few waves as possible. Say, hey, how's it going? Boom. And you sit down and you do your thing. Be prepared when you do arrive. Know your character and its abilities. Do not look up stuff on your turn. Do that on someone else's turn. But do so while paying attention. Play your character. Know your backstory and stick to it. It's a role-playing game. If your character is a brainless warmonger, then hack and slash is okay. If your character has 3 brain cells, then he will probably think. Thinking characters all act differently. They all have their own motivations. Play them accordingly. This is a big one for me. Do not cheat. My friend Gerald is annoying because he demands that 2 other players witness each and every roll he makes. He's annoying to the other players. I love him playing in my game because he's guaranteed that he's not cheating because he gets people to witness his rolls. If you have to cheat, don't play. Check out my video on their honor. Do not distract the dungeon master or the other players with stuff outside the game. We are there to play. If you want to talk to us about a movie or a TV show you saw, do it before or after the game. Several of my players years ago went out to see a movie, and it was a good movie, and they would not shut up during the game. They just kept talking about it. Hey, remember when he did this? Remember that happened? That was cool, blah, 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 blah. I stopped the game. I said, go ahead and get that out of your system, and then we'll continue. When that didn't work, and they were still talking about it when we started back up, I called the game for the night, let them go do their thing. Next week we started fresh, and everything was fine. Talking about other stuff from outside the game while you're playing is a distraction for the other players. It's just the way it is. Excuse me. Communication between players about the game is essential. Be positive whenever possible. We're all there to have fun. Try not to argue. I know sometimes this can be difficult, but remember, we're all there to have fun. Continually arguing. Everybody gets into arguments. We're all human. We're all different. Everybody gets into an argument once in a while. Just don't make a habit of it. You know what I'm saying? And if you're going to argue, make sure there's a reason. Otherwise, it's just pointless. Be a good sport. If your character dies, it's a piece of paper. You can make up another one. If you lose a battle, remember that other people lost as well, and it will probably happen again. If another player's character dies, be sympathetic. Remember, we're there to have fun, and your player character might be next. Remember that everyone makes mistakes. The guy who lights a torch so he can see may not realize, or may have had a brain fart. Who knows? But he didn't realize that the non-humans in the group are probably using their infravision and are now temporarily blinded. These things happen. Don't get angry. Laugh it out. It's part of the game. Help the less experienced players when you can. Remember to teach and correct. Don't criticize. You remember, you were new once too, okay? The game needs new players. And the quickest way to lose new players is for the more experienced players to denigrate, criticize, or make fun of them. Nobody likes to be made fun of. Nobody. There are people who can take a joke and it's cool. Some people can't. So, if somebody does something stupid in the game because they're new and inexperienced, no, don't do that. Look, here, this is better, and we, teach. Don't criticize. Always, always, always. This is one thing that I love about Dungeons and Dragons for the players to do. Always try to outthink your dungeon master. Remember, when you outthink your dungeon master, if he's worth his salt, he will take pride in your efforts and your success. He's there to create an adventure for you, a challenge for you to overcome. When you do that, he has succeeded. When you rub his nose in it, any dungeon master worthy of the title will consider it the champagne of victory. At some point, you will want to join another Dungeon Master's game. If you're a Dungeon Master, it's good to get out and find out what's going on in other people's games. And it's good to revitalize your imagination from time to time. So playing in other people's games is a good thing as a Dungeon Master. If you're a player, you want as wide a variety of experience as possible playing the game in case later on you want to become a dungeon master. If you're having fun playing in the guy's game that you're playing in your current dungeon master's game, amen, great. But you want to play in other people's games as well so that you know the difference. It's you don't know how good you've got it until until you realize what else is going on. The grass is always greener on the other side, and besides that, you may find a better game. You never know. But at some point, you'll want to join another Dungeon Master's game. One of the things I learned quickly is how to spot crappy Dungeon Masters. This is a useful skill, and I'm not saying no two Dungeon Masters are alike. Everybody runs their game differently, and there is no wrong way to play. If you find a guy who's just, in your opinion, the crappiest dungeon master on the planet, he's a dungeon master. He's got players that like playing in his game. You see what I'm saying? So, it may not be your cup of tea, but it may be theirs. So don't trash the guy. Just don't play in his game. Find yourself another good dungeon master. At least one that's good in your opinion. You see what I'm saying? Crappy dungeon masters are dungeon masters who either are not ready to be a dungeon master, or they have a good working knowledge of the game, but they have the wrong temperament or the wrong attitude to run games. Maybe they're a control freak. I don't know. There's a lot of reasons why somebody could be a bad dungeon master, and putting that in one video would be almost impossible. So I'm going to go with the obvious ones. If you see these, they're red flags, and you don't want to play in this guy's game. Here are some of my standards. First, if the dungeon master won't give you a preliminary sit down. Many players of dungeon masters, I think these days, call it a session zero. I predate that term. I used to call it a sit down, but in any way you want to look at it, no matter what you call it, in this sit down, the dungeon master explains the basics of his world, including house rules and how spells work. Everybody has their own house rules. Everybody has their own way of doing it, and none of them are wrong. Okay, there is no wrong way to play Dungeons and Dragons. If the players are having fun, the dungeon master is doing it right. It just may not be right for you. The dungeon master will, in this sit down, he's going to tell you the character classes and races that he allows and the experience system he uses. All of this is valuable information that you need to know to play in his game. Also, in this sit down, you should roll up your character and make sure it works in his game. Then he should run you a bit to integrate you and to catch you up to the group. That way, you won't sit there for hours while the group finds your character. That's one of the things that used to irritate the piss out of me, is if I'm going to play in somebody's game and I make up a character and I'm sitting there waiting on them to get where I am. Because there's two styles of play, in my opinion. There's the let's get things done, or I want to role play and act out every scene. There's got to be a nice balance there. In my opinion, a balance between the two is ideal. But if the group is one of those, let's get everything done now, you miss the fun of playing because they're running down the road to the next bad guy or whatever. You see what I'm saying? They miss the role play experience. Conversely, if these people want to role play every scene and get every nook and cranny of the world explored, if you're sitting there waiting on them to find you, that's going to take fucking forever. So, my point is, let this guy get you integrated into the game so that you're with the group when the game starts. Number 2, does the Dungeon Master have a set schedule for his games? And if not, there will be scheduling conflicts. If this guy says, well, we play on the weekends, but we have to figure out what day we're going to do it. No, that ain't going to work. Okay? People have lives. You have to this guy has to have a set time to play his game, otherwise you can't schedule your life. You see what I'm saying? Does this guy cancel game sessions on a regular basis? Now life is hard. We all have real life things that get in the way. Life gets in the way. If the Dungeon Master doesn't have time to run his game, he needs to say so. That way the players can make other plans. If he doesn't have time to run a game, he probably shouldn't be running a game. Now, I work full-time and I have a family. If I schedule time for a regular game session and it gets canceled, I'm wasting my time. I don't have time for that shit. Okay? Do you click with the Dungeon Master? To a lesser degree, do you click with the other players? I've played in games where I did not necessarily like the other players, and as long as it's reasonably cordial and friendly, it's okay. If you do not get along with the Dungeon Master, it will be a bad game. There's nothing worse than a Dungeon Master who doesn't like you and targets your character, because it takes away from the gaming experience. Is the sense of humor on your level? This is an important one. If not, the games are going to be awkward. And what I mean by that is, I went to join a guy's game about 19 years ago, I think it was. It was shortly before I got married. And the guys seemed nice enough. They seemed okay. But when I sat down with the group and we started to play, their sense of humor was high school at best. We're talking dick jokes, gay jokes, bad puns, bad practical jokes, telling stories of bad practical jokes. Several of them worked together, so they brought that into it as well, and it was... I'm sorry, I don't want to sound like I'm better than everybody else, because I'm not, but my sense of humor is a little more advanced than that, and when I was warned not to let my character, not to fall asleep around so-and-so, or bad things were going to happen, if you know what I mean, yeah, I couldn't do that anymore. There's humor, and then there's humor. And, these guys enjoyed playing with the Dungeon Master. Amen. If that's their style, knock yourself out. Again, there is no wrong way to play Dungeons and Dragons. There is a bad fit. And that particular scenario was a bad fit for me. So I did not play in that game. Is the Dungeon Master at least as mature as you are? That's an important thing. Maturity is important when it comes to being a Dungeon Master, because it details fair play, dedication to the game, that kind of thing. Now, again, I've been playing this game for 47 years. I don't prescribe to know everything, but I do take the game seriously compared to a lot of other people. So it's hard to find people as mature as I am when it comes to the game. Does the Dungeon Master target players he doesn't necessarily like? We talked about that earlier. That's an important thing to consider. Does the dungeon master prepare accordingly for game sessions? If you show up and the guy says, well, I don't have time to do anything, I'll run you through the woods, that kind of thing. You meet in a bar, that kind of thing. No. The dungeon master has to be as committed to the game as the players. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Does the dungeon master include every player character in the storyline? That is very, very important. If half the players have nothing to do because he's centering the game, the storyline, the plot on either his friend or his girlfriend or whatever in the group, if he's playing favorites, that's not going to work. That is not going to work. Are the encounters reasonable and appropriate for the story? If you're in town and you're investigating a corrupt politician and a horde of orcs show up and attack you in the street, something's wrong with that. How'd they get in the city? How'd they get through the gates? Why are there orcs roaming freely in this city, allowing, to band together? Did they sneak in through the sewers? Come on. Are the encounters reasonable and appropriate for the story? I mean, if the investigation took them out of the city and there was a band of orcs that the bad guy hired waiting on them out there, that's fine. But, think about where they are. That's all I'm saying. Are the opponents appropriate to face the player characters? If you're first level players and they send you against Tiamat, yeah, something's wrong. Does the dungeon master run his own player characters as NPCs? This is a big, big, big gripe of mine. This is not a pet peeve. This is, if this happens, I stand up and walk out. I grab my stuff and I leave and I don't go back, because too many times the dungeon master will let his NPC be the superstar and the player characters become background. That should never, ever, ever, ever happen. Ever. I did a video called NPC Superstar about a guy who ran his Star Trek character, Star Trek the role-playing game character, as an NPC, and go watch that video. You'll see what I'm talking about. That has been a pet peeve of mine for decades, and I do not allow that as a player. And yes, as a player, you do have rights in the game. Okay? The minute he says, I'm going to run this character, he was my character years ago, blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what? You have a good time, y'all have fun, and I get up and I leave. Because it's pointless. Does the dungeon master lose his temper frequently? If he does not have the temperament to be a fair and impartial dungeon master, he should not be running games. If he loses his temper frequently for bullshit reasons, yeah, you ain't going to have fun in his game. It's that simple. Does the dungeon master ignore common sense and the laws of physics? Okay, this is one of my big things in the game as well, the laws of physics. Common sense is important too, but the laws of physics have to apply in any game. Let me explain. In Dungeons and Dragons, there's magic. Magic, by definition, violates the laws of physics. If you're in a game that the laws of physics do not apply in the game, how do you know if the magic works? Magic is going to be pointless, because magic, by definition, violates the laws of physics. If the laws of physics don't apply, magic is pointless. It's useless. Is the dungeon master a Monty Hall? Is this guy going to give you... Now, I've had this happen to me a lot, and it's... I find a dungeon master who is younger or who has... for example, has played in my game. That's a big one. And I show up and I play a game session for 3 or 4 hours, whatever, and he heaps rewards on me in both gold and experience so much that my character can't carry it all. I'm a first level character, and suddenly I jump to 12th level or whatever. Yeah, no, you cannot be a Monty Hall. You cannot be a Monty Hall. If I don't play under Monty Halls, I prefer to work for my stuff. I am not a Monty Hall. Anybody who's ever played in my games will tell you that I'm not a Monty Hall. I have a reputation that if a character reaches high level in my game, they damn well earned it. I do not like Monty Halls. And for those of you who don't know what a Monty Hall is, it's a dungeon master who you kill one orc and suddenly you're a king, or he gives you so much magic and treasure that it's you have to pick and choose what to take with you because you can't take it all. That's a Monty Hall. Does the dungeon master allow the players to walk all over him? That's another one. I've seen players dictate to the dungeon master how to run his game, and that's not good. The dungeon master should run his game his way. Now, if the players like it, they'll stay. If not, they won't. If he finds suddenly he has no players, maybe he'll change the way he plays. That's how that works. But allowing the players to walk all over you as a dungeon master, no, you can't let that happen. Does the dungeon master use a controlling and predatory style? Here, that's a big one. I've seen dungeon masters. You have to do this. You have to do that. No, you're going to do it this way. No, I want to do it this. No, you can't do that. You need to go over here and do this. If the dungeon master is saying that, his game he's seriously he's not thought his game through. Because the idea is you create an adventure, and if they go and do the adventure, great. If not, you have to have something prepared for when they go that way, or this other way, or that other way over there. But controlling and predatory style, if a dungeon master picks on people because they're, I don't know, disabled or a woman or maybe not as smart as some of the other players, yeah, you need to get away from that guy. Okay, he's not a good dungeon master. Now, these are not all of my standards, but they will surely weed out the bulk of the crappy dungeon masters. Remember, you don't have to be rude, just politely decline to play in their game. I've been doing this a long time. If I sit down to play in somebody's game and they're exhibiting some of these traits that I've outlined here, I'll grab my dice and books and get up and walk away. I won't even say anything, because I've been through the ringer before, and I won't do it again. If it's a dungeon master who doesn't know that they're being a bad dungeon master, I will try to help them. But if this guy's an experienced guy and he knows what he's doing and he's doing this stuff, yeah, just get up and leave. Okay? Remember the rule number 1 of role-playing games. Any role-playing game. There is no wrong way to play. If the players are having fun, the dungeon master is doing it right. It just may not be right for you. Sometimes a quality game is just not a good fit. Not everyone clicks all the time. Keep that in mind. One thing many people have a hard time understanding is that advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and most tabletop role-playing games for that matter, are team games. One player takes the part of the dungeon master. In other games, it's called the game master or the storyteller or the mission director or whatever. In advanced Dungeons & Dragons, it's called the dungeon master. This person runs the game. He or she controls the world and everyone and everything in it, that in that world, that's not the other players. So anybody who's not a player character, the dungeon master runs. The rest of the players make up characters, personas, avatars, whatever you want to call them, which are their playing pieces in the game. Characters in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons belong to a class, or a profession, if you will. These classes are fighter, wizard, which is like a magic user, cleric, thief, or monk. Actually, I think it's called a magic user. Wizard is what everybody calls it, because that's what it is. So you got fighters, magic users, clerics, thieves, or monks. These are the basic classes that there are. Subclasses exist, like Rangers, paladins, druids, assassins, etc. Bards, that kind of thing. A bard is, in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, bard is one you build. You start out as I think a fighter or a thief, and then you go to whichever the other one, and then you take up training as a druid, but by that time you're a bard. I really like bards because by the time you actually become a bard, you don't need to be. You've got everything else, you know? At any rate, but the subclasses are there: ranger, paladin, druid, assassin, that kind of thing. Each class has specific skills and abilities, but no one class can do everything. Hence the term, that's why it's a team game. A party can be made up of literally any combination of these classes and subclasses. Now, over the years, I have used a number of different methods for figuring out the different classes that players would run. Generally speaking, I let players choose their classes. Usually this works out pretty well. Then, of course, there was a time we had 8 magic users in the game with nothing else. Had 8 players and everybody wanted to run a magic user, which, it worked really good. But the problem was at first level they decided to explore an old temple, and the denizens of that temple, a band of orcs led by a high-level Orcan cleric, they feasted well. Sometimes I will write down the classes that I need for the party on pieces of paper and have each person draw randomly, usually as they come in the door. Sometimes I'll write the classes down on a clipboard and hand it to the players as they arrive. They choose what they want to play on a first-come, first-served basis, basically. However you want to do it, as long as nobody objects to, it's fine. Ideally, in any party, you want at least one wizard, at least one thief, and at least one cleric. And then you want a number of fighters. More fighters than anything else, because that's what you're going to need the most of. Now, certainly clerics can be good fighters, but they're also your healers. So, And thieves make great fighters as long as they can attack from behind, sneak attack. But again, there is no substitute for a good old-fashioned fighter. Party size is also a serious consideration. I prefer a party of 5 to 6 players. More than that, and the game can get bogged down. I've run games of 8 to 12 before. That was plenty. That was more than enough. I ran a group of 16 one time. That was a nightmare. 5 to 6 players is good because you can have a wizard, a cleric, a thief, and 2 to 3 fighters. It's a nice little team. I have run players solo, and it can be fun. Groups of 2 to 4 is good, but you have to have players that are resourceful and intelligent and have good characters. Otherwise, the Dungeon Master needs to adjust the game that he's preparing. If you're preparing for a group of 2 to 4 players, that's cool. Generally, games have parties a bit bigger than that. During the course of the game, you will have player characters die. That's just a part of the game. When a player makes up a new character, you don't want them to run the same character over and over because it becomes cookie cutter, dull, and boring. The last thing you want any of your players to say is, I'm kind of bored with this. You know what I'm saying? I have a house rule that I use, and it works really well. If your character dies, your next character has to be of a different class. That helps to keep the experience fresh. That rule can kind of bite you in the ass because it's rare that this happens, but it can happen. I had a group one time, I had a wizard, a cleric, a thief, and 3 fighters. And through the course of the game, the wizard, the cleric, and the thief all turned and fled because the fighters all died. So the fighters had to run something else. We ended up in a group with no fighters. That was a little dicey for a while there, But again, that's rare. The chances of everybody of one class dying if you have more than one is if you have a total party kill, just have people pick different things. I'm just saying. One thing you need to stress and foster in your players as the Dungeon Master is teamwork. If you're the Dungeon Master, you have to stress teamwork in your players. As I said before, no one character class can do everything. Fighters fight. Thieves sneak and check for traps. Clerics heal. Wizards use magic. A fighter facing 100 peasants can kill a lot of them, but I guarantee you that at least one of them will get lucky and they're going to roll a crit or whatever, and the fighter will die. The 100 peasants with rakes and hoes and like that will, garden implements, they're going to get that fighter. It just takes time. You add a wizard on the fighter side, and you have fireballs in the masked peasants beyond the front lines, essentially artillery, and it makes everything better. Add a thief to the mix, and he might be able to find a way to sneak past the peasants to avoid the fight altogether. Add a cleric to the team, and you have a medic who can keep the group healthy. So as you can see, each class has their own skills and abilities which complement the others. Make sure that when you design adventures, there's plenty for every character to do. This can be exceedingly difficult, but not doing so can alienate specific characters, players, and make them feel useless. One of the last things you want is for one of your players to say, I got no reason for me here. When a player feels their character is useless, they won't want to play for very long. And remember, the Dungeon Master's job is to make sure each player is having fun. So you have to have you have to have stuff planned for each class to do. In a town, the fighters may be carousing in the inn looking for information. The thief may be talking to the local guilds for information. The cleric will be down at the temple looking for information, and the wizard can be researching for information. Everybody has a part to play. In a fight, as I said, the fighters are the front line. The thieves are trying to get around either behind to backstab or finding a way out. They're scouting. The clerics are healing the fighters. The wizards are casting fireballs behind the front lines, as it were. Everybody has a part to play. It's just, you have to, as a dungeon master, you have to stress teamwork. If everybody runs the same character classes, you get the thing I had with the 8 wizards. It just doesn't work well. It's just not as good. Plus, variety is the spice of life, Accidental deaths. My son and I were sitting in with our new gaming group the other day. We found a group here in Raton, and they game on Sundays. Excellent group. I talked about it, the game masters in the dungeon masters in a video the other day. Go check that out. The subject came up about how easy it is to die in first edition. The majority of those players have never played first edition. It's a 5th edition group, 5e. I mentioned the time that my first edition, first level magic user tried to mount his horse. The horse got spooked. I honestly don't remember how or why. My first edition, first level magic user with 6 hit points. I rolled maximum and +2 for my constitution. I rolled maximum, 6 hit points. Was dragged down the street and died. Another funny story, my friend George walked out of an inn back in the day in first edition. He tried to cross a busy street in a good-sized town. His first level fighter failed a dexterity check and was run down by a freight wagon. 1 dead fighter. We've all heard stories of the irresponsible magic user with the errant fireball that hits his own party members by accident. Stories like this are a dime a dozen. I did a video a while back titled Read Your Spells. Check it out. Magic users can be as dangerous to their own party as any enemy if they are ignorant of what their spells do and how they work. And I suppose that's true in any edition of Dungeons & Dragons, but probably more so in first edition. What many players fail to realize is that first edition player characters can die in any number of ways and virtually by accident. For purposes of this topic, I'm going to omit cases of player stupidity like the time the barbarian started drinking from unmarked bottles in an alchemist shop hoping to get drunk. Yeah, he died. Or the time the thief decided to try to ride a wild horse. He'd never ridden a horse before, and the player hadn't either. The horse had been corralled, and the thief was thrown and then trampled. Cases like this, the player is virtually asking for his player character to die. They are tempting fate. This video is dealing with cases where the player character is undertaking normal activity and, for whatever reason, bad luck steps in and the character dies. My friend Larry's cleric, for example, stepped into a pool of water to cross to the other side. He stepped in, it was ankle deep, no big deal. Turns out the center of the pool dropped off to 20 feet deep. The cleric failed a dexterity check and sank. Unfortunately, he was wearing plate mail armor. He had no knife or other edged weapon to cut loose his armor. He drowned. Now, for those of you who don't understand why he wouldn't have an edged weapon, in first edition, according to the rules, clerics cannot use edged weapons. They use blunt items. Well, there's no way to take off a suit of plate mail armor in the time in one breath of air. It's just not happening. Okay, it's like a 15-minute process. The only shot he had was to cut loose the armor, and he didn't have anything to cut with. So, yeah, he drowned. That was just bad luck. The dexterity check was the bad luck. My friend Mark's thief tried to climb a 60-foot tower to gain entrance at the top. Because that's what thieves do, right? As per the book, he made it to the midpoint, which is 30 feet, before he had to roll for the rest of the climb. He had serious bonuses, but still failed the roll. Just bad luck. The 30-foot fall, 3d6 damage, killed the first level thief. In 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, it is very difficult to have your player character die. In 1st edition, as you can see, a player character can die easily in an instant by accident at virtually any time. You have to be very, very careful in 1st edition. 1st edition players have instinctively, this is something I talked about with one of the dungeon masters in our new game, the one we're running on Sunday, the one we're playing in on Sundays. 1st edition players have instinctively learned to make their characters as survivable as possible. 5th edition players probably think we're homicidal maniacs who make their player characters as OP as possible, overpowered as possible. It's actually just self-preservation, and it's kind of funny when you think about it. Yeah, your 1st edition players, people who play 1st edition Dungeons and Dragons have instinctively have I guess developed the skill to create ways to make your character survive. When I made for example, I ran a barbarian in there, the Chris's game, and that barbarian had 200 hit points. That barbarian had so many decent, and don't get me wrong, Chris runs a great game, and I'm enjoying playing. But that barbarian, he virtually can't die. In order for Chris to kill off that character, he has to put something in there capable of killing it off. And he can't do that without wiping out the rest of the party. You see what I'm saying? And that's my fault, not Chris's. My fault. Because I'm used to playing 1st edition. And Chris, if you hear this, my apologies, sir. Because it's not your fault, it's my fault. I'm used to playing in more vicious games, and I'm sorry. It's not your fault, sir. It's not your fault. It's my fault. Stay in your lane. Now, I'm not usually one to tell players not to experiment or not to try new things with their characters. The whole point of a role-playing game is to try new things. And, at least that's one of them. Have fun trying new things. And to be creative and inventive. And that's a good thing. But an event happened the other day in our 5e game that prompted me to make this particular video. I feel I should preface this by saying that this advice is translatable into virtually any tabletop role-playing game. Also, our group is playing 2 different games. Chris runs a 15th level game wherein I run a bugbear barbarian. Nico shares the DM's chair with Alex, and I run a 9th level rogue assassin in their game. All of them are excellent dungeon masters, and I'm having a lot of fun regardless of which game is being played or whichever one they decide to do that week. And I'm having just a hell of a lot of fun playing. These guys are excellent game masters, and I'm having fun. With the right group, tabletop role playing games are the shit. They're awesome. In Chris's game a few weeks ago, the group found itself in a Norse area surrounded by, in effect, other barbarians. My barbarian was happy as a pig in shit. One of our group was some sort of a spellcaster. I was not. This guy was not a frontline fighter. The player was inexperienced, and for whatever reason, he started trying to emulate my barbarian. I explained to him multiple times that his caster was not a fighter. He was not a fighter type. This guy was not meant to go toe-to-toe with people. But he absolutely refused to listen. My barbarian got into a drinking contest, and his character jumped into it as well. Then my barbarian entered into a fighting pit. His spellcaster, followed suit. These were barbarians who detested magic, and magic was not allowed in the pits. So his opponent had ample reason not to take it easy on the spellcaster. His character had a strength of 10 and a constitution of 12, and he was trading punches with a 7-foot behemoth. Not smart. The player was not happy when he got destroyed. I mean, he didn't die, but, he got knocked unconscious. I think he was angry with me for not helping him, but it was single combat. I couldn't help him, and I did warn him. He stepped out of his lane. In Nico and Alex's game, my rogue assassin has one function. He is a problem eliminator. If he goes before the opponent in the round, his assassination ability allows him to do hellacious amounts of damage. But that's all he does. He gets one shot per round, and it's a great shot, but that's it. He doesn't do magic or anything fancy. He kills things. That's his function. That's it. And he's good at it. That's his lane, and he stays firmly in it. We have a bunch of other player characters in the group who fight and do magic and have all sorts of different skills, so variety is not an issue. I stick to my lane, and as a team, our group is exceedingly effective. These other players are wonderful with their characters, and as a team effort, we get the job done. We're badasses. Okay? But again, my character doesn't do magic, he doesn't heal, he doesn't, my character is a problem eliminator. He works for the king, eliminating problems. And the major villain we're going after is the problem that I'm trying to eliminate in the game. So it works out well. When you create a character, figure out their lane and stay within it. It's okay to experiment a little here and there, try new things, but remember where your lane is and be ready to jump back into it in a moment's notice. Don't stray so far from it that you can't get back into it. You want to be able to get back into it quickly if you need to. Otherwise, you might find yourself waking up with a serious hangover and more lumps than you can count, if you're lucky. Remember, it could have been much, much worse. There's always an or worse. I felt bad for this kid because he wanted to participate and he was doing good. The problem that I had that he had was he was trying to do things my barbarian was doing. My barbarian is almost 8 feet tall. He's a bugbear. He lives for the fight. His spellcaster wasn't built like that. He left his lane, and that was that. So at any rate, know your lane, stay in your lane primarily. And it's okay to get out of that and go experiment a little bit here and there, but just watch out for what's going on around you because you want to jump back in that lane as quickly as you can if you need to.